the Gospel of Luke. We'll be reading from Luke chapter 6, verses 27 through 38. It is on page 64 in your pew Bibles. Let us listen for the word of God. But I say to you that listen, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. Give to everyone who begs of you. And if anyone takes away your goods, do not ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive much again. But love your enemies, do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Be merciful as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and that will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure that you give will be the measure that you get back. This is the word of the Lord. So, I am originally from South Africa. I grew up in a really horrifying time in history called apartheid. And really, when you're young, you don't realize or are aware of the upside downness of that world. The otherness of people that are not there. But as you grow older, you start to realize that something is off in your world. And you realize that otherness is really only skin deep. That color just goes as far as what we see on the outside. And for a long time, and still, I got to deal with what I was taught as a kid, not so much by my parents, but society as a whole. So when I was in seminary, I went back home to do one of my field education credits instead of doing it in the States. And I did it at a nonprofit. I didn't go to a church. I worked with this nonprofit called the Nova Institute. And what was really great about them is what they existed for was to give back, to change systems of oppression, to equalize, to do justice. And in some ways, maybe that helped me face my own demons of racism. I worked with little ones. I was involved in writing new curricula and doing some education for what turned out to be mostly AIDS orphans. And to be honest, dealing with racism and your privilege in a place where little kids run around and live in shacks and have no running water and no electricity and no sewage and really nothing much in life makes you look at the world a little differently, shall I say. But I tell you one thing, that this was one of the best experiences of my life. Honest to God. To teach these kids that they are actually worth something, that there is a God that loves them, that they are human beings and that they have dignity and that they have possibilities in the world, was a challenge. Not so much for them as it was for me. But the love that I received and the love that I could give is something that will never leave me. Even from a bunch of kids that didn't really have anything to give in their own eyes. See, this organization, I think, did kingdom work. That's how they saw themselves. They saw themselves as the hands and the feet and the eyes and the ears and the heart of Christ. They truly loved those who for so long have been told that they are not worthy, that they are barely human. They truly practiced what it looked like to imitate Christ. To live as Christ would have us live. And I believe that in all my heart, and it changed my life. They cared for those others and saw them as the children of God that they are. Just like all of you sitting in this pew today. It's easy to talk about love, isn't it? The hard part is to get down into the dirty of doing love. It's easy to read 1 Corinthians 13 and measure that as the pinnacle and the ultimate thing that we talk about as love. But I want to dare say that this passage that we read today is really the measure of love that we hold, or we need to hold up before ourselves. To love your enemies. To do good to those who even hate you. To extend hospitality to those who can in no way reciprocate. To give without expecting anything in return. To bless and to pray for those who come after you. That's love. And I think maybe there's some subtle ways that Jesus tells us here too about what love is, not just in praying for our enemies, but maybe to challenge those easy assumptions that we make. It's easy to say we love. But think about the haste that we sometimes dismiss people with, or ignore, or brush away the plight of our neighbors, thinking that they should make better choices. The stereotypes we put out there, and sometimes even that ignorance that we operate under. Ignorance is bliss, right? The fact that today in our world we can barely talk to someone who has a different opinion of us, or where we see differences, is quite telling of how the world has changed. How hard it is for us to find the common ground of seeing Christ in one another. And so it makes me wonder at times if the versions of Christianity we inherited and it is going on in life are somewhat watered down, somewhat flattened, tamed, in the light of how radical Jesus was when he said the things that he is telling us today. Our version of Christianity sometimes seems to me that it will give us the ticket into heaven, but it forgets about the plight and the things that threaten life on earth, in the kingdom that we are supposed to establish right here and right now. We like to give people their little comfort for the week so they can go home and feel good about themselves. We read self-help books to become better people. We even sometimes often offer mercy. But this love that Jesus talks about here is a beast of a different color. Because what we really need to do is ask, how can we make God's kingdom come right here and right now? Do we maybe more often need to ask, what do we, people who call ourselves followers of Christ, need to do to become a greater force of good in relation to all the bad in the world? Did God not send Jesus to overcome genocide by learning how to love one another? How to overcome tribalism and poverty by following His way? How to deal with injustice and corruption? How to make life better here by following His ministry? Isn't that what we as kingdom bearers are called to do? Not just to not do harm, not just to be nice and kind, but to do unto others as you would have them do to you. To love in places where love seems impossible. Because that's what Jesus' ministry demonstrated, isn't it? He ate with sinners, after all. He forgave sins, he healed the sick. He even called tax collectors to follow him. And most of all, he did not resist those who came after him and harmed him. Not because he was weak or a doormat for everything that came across, but because he loved so incredibly that he gave his whole life. And he gave that life for all of us. But I want you to hear that because he gave it to you and to you and to you and to you. And I can point fingers at every one of you. And I want you to sit with that for a minute. Because such sacrificial love is only possible when we believe that God has done this for us, that He is in us and with us, and that we can do the same thing. It is only possible for those whose dispositions and whose convictions and whose commitments have been reshaped by that transformative power of God. That abundance that God has poured out on us over and over and still does. That cause us to love and to be merciful as our Father is merciful. And yes, it goes against all our natural instincts, doesn't it? It goes against everything that the world teaches us. That it's all about me. And what I can gather, I need to gather. And I need to pull myself up by my own bootstraps. And that so can the rest of the world do. What we need to do is what Jesus tells us to do, is that hard thing, is to love when it is impossible, to give when we will not get anything in return. And that implies that we have to get to exactly what I'm talking about. It means seeing the image of the face, of the image of Christ, the image of God that we were all made in, by the way, in every person that we meet. That means getting out of our own personal comfort zone at times and step into places that is unfamiliar and unknown and uncomfortable. It means acknowledging and working to move beyond all the isms of our time and beyond all the schisms of our time. Loving the other, whomever the other may be, is evidence that we are in fact children of our Father in heaven. When it comes to following Jesus, and when it comes to love, and when it comes to us calling ourselves children of God, we don't have an out. We do to others. We are imitators, and we shed that grace that God has shared with us into the world. Because God has shed that grace on us, regardless of whether we can pay it. And you know what? We're not always that nice to God either. And He still does it. And so we imitate. We return that mercy. And acts of loving kindness. All of us are children of God. All of us live and breathe as beings that God created. And everyone has dignity. He loves the whole wide world. Not just my little corner. And yes, I am my brother's keeper. And my brother or my sister might not look like me. Might not talk like me. And may not look at the world like me. Might have different persuasions. But just based on the dignity and the worth of every person, Jesus taught His disciples to love those who it is even impossible to love. And so we follow. And whether that is good news, I am not always sure. Because if we really say we follow Christ, maybe this is not the best news in the world. Because we have to give up everything. We have to step out and shake the hands of those we don't really care for. We have to step out and help those who we think should have made better choices, but who life has just dealt a raw hand. We have to step out and give without accepting anything in return. And you know what? Sometimes that means stepping into the places where you can be beaten and where you can be robbed and where someone will not necessarily be nice to you. Because it is only in being exposed to the places where this can happen that we can truly love those who God has given us to love. I think it is simple enough in the end, as hard as it is to do. How much grace and love has been shown to you? Think about that. And then, just remember, just in case you want to answer too quickly, bear in mind that the standard of grace we need to demonstrate is the standard of grace that we have received from God. And then my question is, should there be anyone that falls outside the scope of our love and our grace? Love is a difficult choice. Maybe it's not a choice, but it's an action we demonstrate because God has called us to do this. And yes, love is a difficult response and it's a difficult action because it's not always comfortable. And yes, love in the world we live in today is absolutely radical. Just like Jesus. But really, in the end, love is all we need. Amen.